Now that we've discussed values, let's focus our attention on the second important component, which is attitudes. And even though we use the word attitude in common language pretty casually, there is a definition in organizational leadership that really describes well what an attitude is. So, unlike a value, which represents our beliefs, right, across different situations, attitudes relate to our behavior as our behavior is directed towards certain specific people, certain specific situations, certain specific objects, right? So attitudes tend to be a lot more specific than the general belief system that we have on our value side. And an interesting way of describing this is breaking down attitudes into three components, right? So our attitudes can be either affective, cognitive, or behavioral. What is the difference among these three things? So affective attitudes tend to start with the word I feel, right? It's an attitude, it's a belief that we have towards people or situations or things that kind of generate emotional reactions. I feel. I can think of situations in my own life where I might have had a certain attitude toward someone for doing certain things. For example, I don't know how many of you have taken the train or take the bus to commute. And were you ever on a crowded train or a crowded bus and someone was taking up a seat by putting his or her bag on an empty seat and kind of preventing you from sitting there, even though the bus or the train was crowded, right? I have seen that in the past, and in my own experience, I have a very affective attitude towards that situation. I feel that people who put their luggage or their bags on an empty seat on a crowded train or bus may be a bit selfish, or they may not be focused on helping others, right? It's an attitude, it's a feeling that I have. It's affective. The second component of attitudes is what we call cognitive. Cognitive is less about feeling, like affective is, and it's more about believing. So, in the same situation I just described to you a minute ago, I might frame that more cognitively by saying that, look, I believe that people who put their luggage or their bags on an empty seat are selfish. It's not so much that I feel, but it's I believe that people like that are selfish. And then the third type of attitude is what we call behavioral. So sometimes our attitudes get to us so much that they push us to do things, to intend to do things. And so the third category of attitudes is called behavioral. So if I am confronted with that situation where I'm on a crowded bus or train and I need the seat, but someone has their bag on a seat, I might say, look, I intend to ask the person to move their bag. Right? So attitudes can sometimes create behavior in addition to just feelings and beliefs. So remember, affective focuses on how we feel, cognitive focuses on what we believe, and behavioral focuses on our intentions, what we actually intend to do about situations. Now, sometimes our attitudes can collide with reality, and this could make us uncomfortable, right? And there are a couple of different ways that this can take place. So let's say for a moment that I am the person who is putting his bags on the seat next to me on a crowded train. Now, generally speaking, I might see myself as a pretty good person, as a very humble person, and as someone who wants to respect others. But then I realize that I'm putting my bags on a seat on a crowded train next to me, and I say, I wonder, am I really as humble or as good or as concerned about others as I am if I'm putting my bags on the seat? And when we study attitudes, there are three things that happen in a situation like this. So clearly, if I view myself as very humble and respectful, but then I see that I'm taking up somebody's seat to serve myself, I might start to justify this behavior to myself in a couple of different ways. So one thing I could do if I'm confronted with this clash between what I think of myself and how I'm behaving, one thing I could do is I can actually change my behavior. I could say, look, that's not really respectful. This does not match the image that I have of myself. So I'm going to remove my bag from my seat. That's the first thing. The second thing I could do is I could say, yeah, I guess this isn't consistent with the way I see myself. Remember, I think I'm generally good and respectful of others, yet I have my bag taking up this person's seat. So what I might do is I might justify that to myself and say, it's just a seat. I'm not that selfish. Come on, it's not like I'm really harming anybody. I'm still a good person. So I might start to belittle the fact that I'm taking up somebody else's seat. And then the third thing I can do, and we see this a lot, I unfortunately have sometimes done this myself, is number three, I can say, look, it's true, I'm taking up somebody's seat, but I work really hard and I deserve to be able to put my bags on the seat next to me. And I deserve to be comfortable. And I had a harder day than everybody else on this train, I'm sure. So I kind of deserve it. And by the way, I'm working right now, even on this train, and I need a place to rest my arm because I'm doing work on my laptop or something like that. So the third strategy we can use when our attitudes are in conflict with our actual behavior is we can justify to ourselves that we deserve it. Okay. So these are important to know because as you go through management, as you go through leadership, and even as you go through personal life, you can see these examples of when our attitudes clash with the way we actually act. Now, we're going to talk in a moment about specific workplace attitudes. Before we get there, let me just leave you with the fact that it's important to know the difference between a value and an attitude. Remember, values are the general beliefs that we have and that are relatively stable in our lifetimes. Okay? Values are things, as you remember, such as are we concerned about others? Is our value system, power for ourselves? Is it independence for ourselves? Attitudes, though, are much more specific to situations, to people. All right, so understand that distinction between values and attitudes before we proceed.